The first thing my boss did at my promotion party was raise his glass and end my career. It was supposed to be a celebration. My name was on the banner behind him. Congratulations, Kira Morales, Director of Strategic Partnerships. 40 people from finance, legal, product, and sales stood around high tables with champagne flutes, smiling, waiting for the toast. Then he smirked. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mark Halden said, tapping his glass, "I want to congratulate Kira on her ambition." A few polite laughs. He turned toward me, eyes sharp, voice louder now. "But ambition without loyalty is just failure with confidence." The room went still. He lifted his glass again. "So let's be honest. Congratulations. Failure. You're finished?" For half a second, no one reacted. Then someone laughed. Then another. Then the whole room followed. The kind of uncomfortable laughter people use when they don't want to be the only one not laughing. 40 people. Colleagues I'd trained. Executives who'd praised my work in private. I didn't laugh. I set my champagne down, reached into my bag, and pulled out a black envelope. Mark noticed. His smile faltered. I walked up beside him, close enough that only he could hear me. "Before you finish," I said calmly, "you should call the VP." I placed the envelope against his chest. The $4.2 billion deal just vanished. The laughter died in seconds. 10 minutes earlier, I'd still believed this night meant something. For 3 years, I'd led the Atlas account, our largest international partnership. A multi-year infrastructure modernization deal with a European logistics consortium. $4.2 billion in projected revenue. It was fragile, complex, and political. Half the board didn't even understand it. I did. I'd negotiated compliance across 5 countries, rebuilt trust after a data breach that wasn't ours, and personally flown to Zurich, Madrid, and Rotterdam to keep the deal alive when legal wanted to walk. Mark didn't do any of that. Mark took credit. He was my boss, SVP of Commercial Strategy. Polished, charming, and deeply threatened by anyone who didn't need him to speak. For months, I'd felt the shift. Meetings rescheduled without me. Emails forwarded but not replied to. My name slowly disappearing from decks I'd written. Still, when HR told me I'd been promoted, I allowed myself one mistake. I believed it. The party was Mark's idea. "Let's make it public," he'd said. "Show leadership confidence." What he meant was, "Watch this." After I handed him the envelope, Mark stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Kira," he said quietly, teeth clenched, "this is not the time." "It is," I replied. "Check your phone." Inside the envelope was a single page. No logo, no drama. Just a signed notice from the Atlas Consortium's legal counsel. Termination of exclusive negotiation rights. Effective immediately. Mark opened his mouth to speak. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again. I stepped back, giving him space to read. Around us, people shifted. Whispers started. The head of finance frowned. Someone from legal leaned forward, trying to see the paper. Mark's face drained of color. "That's impossible," he muttered. "No," I said evenly. "It's contractual." He looked up at me, eyes sharp now, furious. "You don't have the authority." "I did," I said. "Until yesterday, which is why I used it yesterday." The room was silent enough to hear the HVAC kick on. The VP of Global Operations, Sandra Liu, was already calling him. I could see her name on his screen. He didn't answer. He looked at me instead. "What did you do?" he hissed. "I stopped protecting you," I said. Here's the part no one in that room knew. 2 weeks earlier, I'd been copied on an internal email chain by mistake. Mark and 2 board members discussing risk containment. My name was in it. Kira's become the face of Atlas. That's a problem. Clients trust her more than the firm. We need control before the close. They weren't promoting me. They were sidelining me. The promotion was a decoy, a way to make me visible, then disposable. So I did the only thing experience had taught me to do. I read the contracts. The Atlas agreement had a clause, rare but enforceable. If the firm materially altered the negotiation team without consortium consent before final signature, exclusivity could be withdrawn. Mark had reassigned my authority internally, quietly, without notifying Atlas. He'd broken the deal himself. All I did was notify the client before he could spin it. At the party, Sandra finally pushed through the crowd. "Mark," she said sharply, "why is Atlas refusing to take our calls?" No one laughed anymore. Mark looked around, searching for support. He found none. I picked up my bag. "This was supposed to be my promotion party," I said to the room. "Instead, it's a lesson." I looked at Mark one last time. "You wanted to end my career with a toast," I said. "I just returned the favor." Then I walked out, leaving 40 people standing in silence, and a $4.2 billion hole opening behind me. I didn't go home after the party. I walked a few blocks, turned my phone off, and sat alone in my car until the adrenaline drained out of my body. Not fear. Clarity does that. When something irreversible happens, your system goes quiet before it catches up. When I finally turned my phone back on, the screen lit up instantly. Missed calls, messages, voicemails stacked on top of each other. Mark had called repeatedly. Executive assistants I recognized, legal, HR, and one call from Sandra Liu, the VP of Global Operations. I didn't return any of them. Responding too fast gives people something to grab. Silence forces them to deal with reality instead of shaping it. By the next morning, the tone changed. HR requested an urgent discussion. Legal asked me to preserve documents related to Atlas. IT flagged unusual access activity on my account, even though no one had officially suspended me yet. Mark stopped calling and sent a text instead. "You crossed a line. We need to talk before this gets worse." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I forwarded it to my personal email and archived it. The internal story began to fracture almost immediately. Sandra called again. This time, I answered. "Kira," she said, direct as always. "I need to understand what happened." "You already do," I replied. Atlas withdrew exclusivity after leadership changed the negotiation structure without disclosure. That violates the contract. Mark's version, I knew, was circulating already. That I'd acted alone, that I'd escalated unnecessarily, that I'd embarrassed the firm. Sandra didn't repeat any of it. "He says you acted without authorization," she said carefully. "I acted with the authority I still had," I replied. The client asked a direct question. I answered it honestly. Silence followed. Not resistance. Calculation. "Legal is scrambling," she said finally. "The board is angry." "With him," I said. She didn't disagree. HR followed up again, looping in legal this time. "Pending review, please refrain from external communication related to Atlas." That single sentence told me everything. They weren't firing me yet. They couldn't. Not without acknowledging that I'd been empowered to lead Atlas at the time I disclosed the change. And acknowledging that meant admitting Mark had reassigned control improperly. So they paused. In corporate America, pauses are rarely neutral. They're defensive. Later that day, I received a call I hadn't expected. Daniel Brooks, U.S. Counsel for the Atlas Consortium. "We're getting pressure," he said without ceremony. "From us?" I asked. "No," he said. "From your company." I leaned back in my chair, already understanding. And we're not responding," he continued. "Not until something's clarified." "What's that?" "Who actually leads this deal?" I allowed myself a quiet smile. "That's not unclear," I said. "No," Daniel replied. "Just inconvenient." Most people think billion-dollar deals hinge on branding. They don't. They hinge on continuity. For nearly a year, I'd been the constant point of contact. When timelines slipped, I adjusted. When compliance raised concerns, I resolved them. When Mark spoke in broad promises, clients waited for me to translate feasibility. Atlas didn't trust the firm. They trusted me. and Mark knew it. That's why he tried to end me publicly, control the narrative before the signature phase. What he underestimated was how closely I read. By evening, rumors were everywhere. That I'd sabotaged the deal. That I'd overstepped my role. That I'd gone rogue. No one said the part that mattered. That Mark had miscalculated. Publicly, emotionally, and in front of witnesses. Sandra messaged later that night. The board is forming a review committee. You'll be interviewed. I replied simply. Understood. Then I sent her a folder I'd prepared long before the party. It contained email threads showing Mark's unilateral reassignment. Meeting notes documenting client objections. Legal annotations highlighting breach risk. A clean timeline of decisions, approvals, and communications. No commentary. No framing. Just facts. I slept deeply that night. The following morning, I walked into headquarters as if nothing had changed. Security hesitated, then waved me through. My badge still worked. On my floor, conversations paused when I passed. Some people avoided eye contact. Others looked relieved. Like my presence meant the truth hadn't been buried yet. The review committee met in a small conference room. Board members, legal, HR. Mark wasn't there. That told me enough. They questioned me for over an hour. I didn't defend myself. I explained process, sequence, obligation. Every answer grounded in documentation. When it ended, one board member leaned back and said, "If Atlas doesn't return, this will cost us more than revenue." "I know," I replied. "And if they do? Then you'll need to decide who you trust to finish it." No one pushed back. The message from Atlas arrived later that day. Formal, precise. We are open to re-engagement under revised leadership conditions. No threats, no leverage plays, just clarity. Sandra called immediately. "They want you," she said, explicitly. I closed my eyes for a moment. "And Mark?" A pause. "That's being discussed," she said. For the first time since the toast, something shifted. Not relief. Leverage. And leverage is when a story like mine stops being gossip and starts becoming consequence. By the time the review committee adjourned, the building felt different. Not quieter, tenser. People weren't whispering anymore. They were watching. Watching doors close. Watching who walked with whom. Watching who suddenly had meetings moved, canceled, or postponed pending alignment. That's how power shifts inside a company. Not with announcements, but with calendar changes. I was told to remain available. Not reassigned, not suspended, not promoted, available, which meant no one knew what to do with me yet. Mark avoided me completely. That alone told me the board had clipped him. When senior leaders feel protected, they confront. When they feel exposed, they disappear. His assistant stopped responding to emails. His name vanished from Atlas-related threads. Legal stopped copying him altogether. Instead, questions started coming directly to me. Carefully worded, professionally neutral. "Kira, can you clarify Atlas's data residency concern?" "Kira, do you recall which revision included the opt-out clause?" "Kira, would you be available to join a call if needed?" I answered everyone. Not eagerly, not defensively, just accurately. Sandra called me into her office 2 days later. No witnesses, no HR. Just her, a legal pad, and a door that stayed closed. "The board is split," she said. "Half think Mark overplayed. Half think you exposed us." "They're both right," I said. She exhaled. "Atlas is holding firm. They'll only re-engage if you lead. That creates a problem." "For who?" I asked. She looked at me steadily. "For the people who built a hierarchy that didn't include you at the top." I nodded. "That's not my problem." "No," she agreed. "But it is mine. Here's what most employees never see. Boards don't care about fairness. They care about liability, optics, and continuity. Mark wasn't being evaluated for his behavior at the party. That was embarrassing, not illegal. What mattered was his decision to quietly strip authority from a deal lead without disclosing it to the client. That's breach exposure. And breach exposure costs jobs. A week later, the firm received Atlas's formal conditions for re-engagement. They were reasonable, almost surgical. Kira Morales reinstated as sole deal lead. Direct reporting line to global operations for Atlas duration. No unilateral leadership changes without client consent. Written confirmation of authority. No mention of Mark. Not once. The board argued for hours. I wasn't invited, but Sandra called afterward. "They want to know if you'd accept," she said. "I already have," I replied. She paused. "You understand this puts you above Mark operationally." "I understand it puts the deal where it belongs," I said. "Everything else is politics." Another pause. "Be honest," she said. "If we do this, can you finish Atlas?" "Yes," I said. "If you stop interfering." That was the first time she laughed. The announcement went out internally the next morning. Carefully worded. Bloodless. Effective immediately, Kira Morales will resume leadership of the Atlas Partnership, reporting directly to global operations for the duration of negotiations. No apology. No explanation. No mention of Mark. Just a rearrangement of gravity. The reaction was immediate. My calendar filled up. People who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly checked in. Directors asked for guidance they already knew I could give. Analysts asked if they could stay late to support the deal. And Mark? He sent me one email. "We need to talk." I didn't reply. The board wasn't done. Reinstating me solved Atlas. It didn't solve Mark. They needed a narrative. They found one in organizational realignment. Mark was removed from Atlas oversight to focus on internal strategy initiatives. His authority shrank overnight. Not formally, but functionally. That's the kind of demotion that doesn't show up on LinkedIn. It shows up when no one asks your opinion anymore. Atlas re-engaged quietly. No press. No celebration. Just a new set of meetings, this time without posturing. Daniel Brooks was direct. "We're moving forward," he said, "but trust has been damaged." "I know," I replied. "We'll earn it back." And we did. The deal stabilized. Compliance concerns were resolved. Final pricing locked. Implementation timelines confirmed. Every call ended the same way. "With you leading, this feels different," someone said. I never responded to that. I didn't need to. 2 weeks later, HR finally called me in. This time, it wasn't about review. It was about risk. "We're concerned about retention," the HR director said carefully. "Given recent events." "You should be," I replied. She swallowed. "Are you planning to leave?" "I'm planning to work," I said. "Whether it's here depends on what happens next." She nodded slowly. "What would it take for you to stay?" I thought about Mark's toast. The laughter, the silence afterward. "Structural authority," I said. "Not titles, not promises, authority." She wrote it down. Later that day, Sandra called again. "The board wants to make this right," she said. "That depends on what right means," I replied. "They're considering a new role, one that doesn't sit under Mark." I smiled, just slightly. "Then they're finally paying attention." She hesitated. "If we do this, Mark won't survive it." I didn't answer immediately. Not because I felt conflicted, because consequences don't require commentary. "I didn't start this," I said finally, "but I won't stop it." When the call ended, I looked around my office. Same desk, same view, different gravity. Atlas wasn't just back. I was no longer optional. And when you stop being optional in a place that tried to erase you, the next chapter writes itself. The meeting invite didn't include Mark. That's how I knew it was real. No vague subject line. No stacked attendee list. Just a boardroom reservation, global operations, legal, HR, and Sandra. My name listed last, not out of hierarchy, but because whoever sent it still hadn't adjusted to the fact that I no longer needed positioning. When I walked in, everyone was already seated. They didn't offer coffee. They didn't make small talk. That told me they weren't here to negotiate feelings. They were here to contain damage. Sandra opened the meeting. Atlas is back on track. Final documents are moving towards signature. Implementation planning has started. Legal confirmed it. HR nodded. The board liaison folded his hands. Then the question came. What happens next? No one looked at me when they asked it. That wasn't an accident. It was a test. They wanted to see if I'd step into the space without being invited. I did. What happens next? I said evenly. Depends on whether you want this to happen again. Silence. I continued. Atlas wasn't lost because of market conditions. It was almost lost because authority was misused internally. If you want stability, you don't fix that with damage control. You fix it structurally. The board liaison leaned back. Meaning? Meaning I don't report to someone who sees competence as competition? I said. And no one who controls revenue at that scale should be publicly undermined by their superior. Ever. Legal shifted uncomfortably. HR looked down. Sandra didn't interrupt. They asked me to step out while they discussed. That was new too. When I came back in, the tone had changed again. Less defensive, more procedural. The board is prepared to approve a new role, the liaison said. Vice President of Strategic Partnerships, direct reporting to global operations, authority defined by contract, not discretion. It wasn't the title that mattered. It was the reporting line. And Mark? I asked. A pause. He'll be reassigned, HR said carefully. Effective immediately. Reassigned is a generous word. In practice, Mark was being moved away from anything that generated leverage. No direct reports tied to revenue, no client-facing authority, no seat at the table where decisions became irreversible. He wasn't being fired. He was being removed from relevance. The internal announcement went out before lunch. No mention of the party. No mention of Atlas almost collapsing. Just a clean statement about strategic realignment and enhanced focus on growth. People reacted the way they always do when truth is edited out. Some congratulated me too loudly. Some avoided me entirely. Some pretended nothing had changed. Mark didn't reach out. He didn't have to. His assistant sent a calendar update canceling all recurring meetings. Until further notice. That notice never came. The real shift happened outside the firm. Atlas scheduled a joint session. Not with executives. With implementation leads, engineers, compliance officers. People who actually had to make the deal work. They asked me to open the meeting. Not Sandra. Not legal. Me. I didn't make a speech. I outlined milestones, risks, accountability. I named problems before anyone else could. When the call ended, Daniel Brooks stayed on the line. Off the record, he said, "This is how it should have been from the start." I believed him. A week later, Mark resigned. It wasn't dramatic. No farewell email. No LinkedIn post. Just a quiet update in the internal system and an empty office by Friday afternoon. People whispered, of course, they always do, that he'd been pushed, that he'd negotiated an exit, that he'd chosen to pursue other opportunities. The truth was simpler. He'd lost the one thing that kept him powerful. Control over the narrative. HR called me again, this time with a different tone. "We'd like to discuss long-term incentives," the director said. "Good," I replied. So would I. They offered retention bonuses, deferred comp, equity participation. I listened. Then I said no to half of it. "What I want," I said, "is written authority over the accounts I build, and a clause preventing reassignment without documented cause." Legal blinked. "That's unusual." "So was what happened to Atlas," I replied. They took notes. On Friday afternoon, Sandra stopped by my office. She didn't sit. I won't pretend this was handled well, she said. It wasn't. I appreciated the honesty. You didn't cause it, I said, but you didn't stop it either. She nodded. Fair. Then she hesitated. You could have burned this place down. I know, I said. Why didn't you? I looked out the window, down at the street, people coming and going, none of them aware of how close a multi-billion-dollar decision had come to collapsing over ego. Because I didn't want revenge, I said. I wanted control. She smiled faintly. You got it. The final Atlas documents were signed the following week. No ceremony, no applause, just signatures, confirmations, and implementation schedules locked into place. As the last call ended, I closed my laptop and sat back. The office felt different now. Not because I'd won, because I wasn't bracing anymore. When a workplace tries to humiliate you into silence and fails, it doesn't just change your position. It changes how the building breathes around you. They didn't laugh at me anymore. They listened. And that meant the final chapter wasn't about what they'd taken. It was about what they'd finally learned not to try again. The morning after Atlas closed, I arrived earlier than usual. Not because I had to, because I wanted to see the place before it adjusted to me. Offices remember things. Power shifts leave traces. Who gets greeted, who gets interrupted, whose calendar fills without asking. I watched it all from my desk, untouched, coffee cooling beside my keyboard. No one announced my arrival. No one needed to. Atlas was done. Signed. Live. Real. And for the first time since the party, there was nothing left to react to. The board requested a final debrief the following week. Not a celebration. Not a postmortem. A reckoning. They asked me to walk them through the entire life cycle of Atlas. What worked? What almost failed? Where governance broke down? I didn't soften anything. I explained how ego slows execution, how sidelining expertise creates blind spots, how performative leadership erodes trust faster than missed targets ever could. No names, no dramatics, just cause and effect. When I finished, the chair nodded once. This won't be the last deal like this, he said. No, I replied, but it can be the last one mishandled this way. They agreed. Mark's departure left a vacuum. That's the part people romanticize. Someone falls, and suddenly everything improves. That's not how it works. Vacuum creates uncertainty. People waited to see who would fill it, who would grab for authority, who would posture. I didn't. I let process speak. Decisions were documented. Authority was clarified. Meetings ended on time. Credit went where it belonged. Within weeks, the noise died down. Not because people forgot what happened, but because stability replaced spectacle. HR finalized my revised agreement quietly. Expanded authority. Defined protections. Clear reporting lines. No press release. No announcement. That's how real power settles in. It doesn't ask to be noticed. Sandra signed it herself and handed it to me without ceremony. You earned this, she said. I corrected her. I protected it. She smiled. That too. The promotion party became a story people told carefully. Always vague, always distorted. Some versions made Mark crueler than he was. Others made me colder. The truth sat somewhere quieter. A leader tried to humiliate someone publicly to remind the room who mattered. The room learned instead. That lesson lingered. Months later, I ran into one of the analysts who'd laughed that night. She hesitated before speaking. I didn't think you'd recover, she said, not unkindly. I'm sorry. I nodded. You weren't wrong? She looked confused. I didn't recover, I said. I reorganized. She understood that. What surprised me most wasn't how the company changed. It was how I did. I stopped explaining myself. Stopped over-preparing for people who didn't listen. Stopped assuming competence would be recognized without structure. I learned something no training ever teaches you. Workplace revenge isn't about destruction. It's about refusal. Refusing to disappear quietly. Refusing to carry blame you didn't earn. Refusing to play small to protect someone else's insecurity. The final Atlas implementation review wrapped without issue. No drama, no late nights, just execution. As I closed the last report, I thought back to that black envelope, the room full of laughter. The moment meant to end me. It didn't, because humiliation only works if you accept it as truth. I didn't. On my desk now sits a framed document. Not the Atlas contract, not my promotion letter. A single page from the internal policy update approved after everything settled. Public disparagement of employees by leadership constitutes a violation of conduct standards. It doesn't have my name on it. It doesn't need to. People sometimes ask if I regret not making it louder, if I wish I'd called out names, exposed texts, burned bridges. I don't, because the goal was never noise. It was permanence. Mark is gone. Atlas stands. The firm remembers. And I walk into rooms now knowing something that can't be taken from me again. When someone tries to end you publicly, the most devastating response isn't anger. It's accuracy. Because accuracy survives long after applause fades.